Coming up next on Insights on PBS Hawaii, a look ahead to November's general election and reflection on Saturday's primary. Aloha and welcome to Insights. I'm Daryl Huff with Hawaii News Now for Insights on PBS Hawaii. Saturday's primary was marked by historic victory, staggering defeat, and suspenseful uncertainty, and set the stage for another unpredictable election in November. Tonight on Insights, we'll talk to political experts about how Governor Neil Abercrombie became the first governor in the state history to lose in the primary, the outlook on federal races, the impact of Hurricane Iselle on election results, and other issues you, our viewers, are interested in. We invite you to join our conversation by calling, emailing, or tweeting your questions and comments. Now to our panel. Governor John Waihee was Hawaii's governor from 1986 to 1994. He is the current chair of the Kani o Luvalo, the effort to enroll Hawaiians to take part in rebuilding their own nation. He's laughing at me now. Close. He was a supporter and confidant to Governor Abercrombie during the primary election. John Hart is chairman of the communication department at Hawaii Pacific University, whose specialties include local and national elections. Chad Blair is a veteran Hawaii reporter who covers politics for Honolulu's Civil Beat. And Colin Moore is an assistant professor of political science at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And let's start first with the Schatz-Hanabusa raid. It's very top of mind. It's still in the news today. Chad, bring us up to date on what happened today and what's going to happen tomorrow.
Well, Colleen Hanabusa lost her lawsuit to delay the election. She thought that there should be given more time because the folks in Puna don't have power. They don't have water. A lot of folks don't even seem to know that the election is actually happening in 2 precincts on Friday. But Judge Greg Nakamura in Hilo said, look, I don't have any justification to stop this. And so probably 24 hours from now, from this show, we're going to know who's going to be the winner of the Senate race, barring some other legal action that could follow.
And John, you've taken a look at these numbers pretty closely. What's the real chances that Hanabusa could actually win this? She's about 1,600 votes behind at this point.
Yeah, well, I think before we do that, we really ought to look at what the judge said, because the headline is election goes on. But also what the judge said was, since it's PBS, I can read this, also there would be a concern regarding the legitimacy of the election if it is held tomorrow. If held tomorrow, likely a post-election challenge is invited. That's not me, that's the judge's quote. He also says, frankly, holding the election tomorrow shows some insensitivity to the plight of the people in Puna. But most importantly, what he says is, the court is not supposed to interfere with an ongoing election process, even if it is unconstitutional. So what this has written all over it is lawsuit.
Well, I mean, I think John and Chad are right. I mean, there's probably going to be a lawsuit after this. I think what's probably going to play out, given what we know from the 2 precincts in Puna that did vote, is that they may go for shots. I mean, I doubt this margin is going to close. It may even widen by a few votes, and then we're going to see a post-election legal challenge. So I doubt we're even going to know officially who won tomorrow.
They may be, though, but as a practical matter, you've got to show this whatever could have happened would have changed the result of the election. And just statistically, that's going to be an extremely difficult case to make.
Governor, I want to also point out to our viewers is that you've also been an advisor to the Schatz campaign, and so what's it like now for the Schatz campaign? What's been the but what's been the strategy, you know, in terms of, okay, you've got all this stuff happening, what did you decide to do?
Well, I think for Senator Schatz, the best strategy is to just go out there and help the people and not get involved. Not get involved in the controversy as to whether the election should happen tomorrow or subsequently, and just, you know, it's not something that he created. God intervened, and then what are you going to do?
But if you wanted to play devil's advocate on this, could someone ask the senator, if you're so concerned that you're out there giving out water, if it's that bad, don't you think they ought to have 2 weeks to vote?
Well, I think that there are 2 things at play here, because on the other hand, there are people who want to conclude the election and move on with their lives. And so what do? You have an event that intervenes in what is normal, and you just do the best you can with the decisions that you have. And that's what the elections office is trying to do. For most people, the voting has already taken place, even people in the district. And so assuming that the roads are clear and the opportunity to go to these polling places are there, let's move forward.
You know, Civil Beat has folks on the ground, and we've been talking to people in Puna, and those are where the 2 precincts are that is going to be voting tomorrow. But what happens if Hanabusa loses and she has pressure to concede? There's a lot of folks in Puna who are saying there's a lot more important stuff right now in my household than getting out and casting a vote for you. And frankly, some people are put off by the fact that Brian and Colleen flew there to hand out water. The governor didn't get there until today. Tulsi Gabbard isn't going to get there until tomorrow. I don't even know if Mazie Hirono is going to show up. So why the urgency? I think Colleen Hanabusa will be under some pressure to gracefully concede, although I agree it's not in her blood.
Let me throw this one at Colin then, in that what you've seen Colleen Hanabusa did. The first day she was invisible. The second day she started talking about the lawsuit, which gave her a platform, and she was able to then talk a lot, and what she talked about was the problems of the people in Puna. Do you feel that perhaps this lawsuit was essentially using the courts as a political stunt? Is that something that crossed your mind?
Yeah, I mean, it did. I think it's not going to end up playing well for her, though, like in ways that Chad has talked about. I mean, this probably was an effective way to draw some attention to this and her frustrations, but she's going to look like a sore loser. I mean, I was just looking at the Facebook comments after some of the Civil Beat stories, and of course, you know, these are probably people who supported Schatz, but this stuff usually doesn't play well with the public. I mean, I think she has a very short period of time. I mean, if it goes Schatz's way, I think people are just going to say, look, you lost. I mean, there's no reason to continue to challenge this. We have other things to worry about, and I think it's not going to work out for her.
John?
Well, she's behind. She has to be the aggressor. I really don't see what other strategy she has. What you're going to see now is a battle for the framing of this story. Much like if you go back to 2000, you read Kathleen Jaminson's excellent book, The Press Effect. And the question is, whose frame are people going to buy? There's one frame we've just talked about. You're a sore loser. You lost. Get over it. We want this done. There's the other frame, the Katrina frame, that, oh, these are poor people who were in a tragedy. The election was stolen. And so the battle for that frame will determine how much leverage she has and whether she will choose to go on to a court suit. Remember, this is a candidate who quite possibly this is her last hurrah. Why should she think about the future? She is clearly in all or nothing.
John, one follow-up quickly, if I may say. 2000 was a very different thing. Al Gore was ahead of George Bush by 500,000 votes nationally, and frankly, he probably won Florida when they did the recount, which came after 9/11. So I think it's a very different thing than Bush versus Gore.
Yeah, and
Let me ask you a question this way, John. I don't want to interrupt your thought, but you know, coming off of what John is saying, do you think that we're actually starting to play out the first round of the 2016 race?
Exactly.
you know, we may be, and we may be because of the, you know, no matter what, that election is going to be very close. Most likely, Brian's going to win. And I'm not really sure that this is the Congresswoman's last hurrah. I mean, who knows? And you're right. I mean, there's not too many things you can do when you have such a small geographic location with a few number of people, and you're behind. I mean,
what I wanted to ask you too, Governor, is that because we were talking earlier about this is a very rare election where you actually see most of the former governors active in the campaigns, publicly active in the campaign. You said that you personally didn't really want to do that, but everybody else started doing it. You ended up on the other side for most of them.
Yeah.
And so,
say
big picture, are we seeing a breaking up of the party? Are we seeing some kind of sea change here in terms of, what do we see? What is the significance of this race and this kind of division?
There are a whole lot of things, you know. I mean, who would have ever thought that Governor Ariyoshi would be on the same side as Governor Cayetano. I never thought that in my little short lifetime. But, you know, I think there was a lot of activity, but I don't think, if anything, I think we may see a resurgence of Pana unity as a result of this election because of Neil's graciousness. I mean, I ran into more people. I mean, it's amazing. at least 3 people have told me, I have never seen anybody so happy to lose, you know, because he was overtly transferring his support over. That, I think, is the most important thing for the Democrats in terms of pulling everything together again.
Are you sending a message to Colleen Hanabusa at this point that maybe that's a good thing for her to do tomorrow?
Well, you know, she probably will.
You think so?
Colleen, yeah, Colleen gave a speech and at the Unity Breakfast, and I have great respect for the Congresswoman. And you know, in an earlier time, the 3 governors actually went out and campaigned for Colleen. We were all on the same side in her race. And she talked about the fact that we are going to all have to pull together. We're going to do what is necessary to win, because the most important thing is to make sure that for Democrats is to make sure that the 1st Congressional District doesn't go to the Republican.
And I might just add, David Ige at the Unity Breakfast expressed terrific gratitude towards Neil Abercrombie for being so gracious and saying, I'm going to stand with you shoulder to shoulder and we are going to win this election. He was visibly relieved, and he went over there. After he conceded, he went to Ige's headquarters election night, and they held hands, high and proud. So I think the governor might have a point.
Let me toss this out to John and Colin. Is this something that they have to do in order to prevent a Republican victory, really, in November? I mean, after having a campaign where they're fighting with each other, you know, is this lovey-dovey stuff all for real?
Well, this is a Democratic frame, and it's the frame they should put forward. The Republicans could put forth an alternative frame that says, Colleen's not in the Senate, and Brian's in CD1, and Neil is still in office. Right now, the governor's race is in play. CD1 is in play, and whatever Democrat got into the Senate didn't get a mandate. I think that's a frame they could propose.
Yeah, well, I disagree, because first of all, whatever Democrat gets into the Senate is going to win the general election by about 10-1.
No question about that.
And so you can't say they didn't have a mandate.
Sorry, Cam.
You're really going out on a limb on this.
I think
I love Cam, but you know.
it's not going to be 10-1.
Well, so maybe that's an hyperbole. But you know, the congressional race, on the other hand, could be close.
Yes.
And I think what is interesting about this Unity Breakfast, I've told people this is one of the best Unity Breakfasts I've ever attended. We are used to going through the ritual of bringing everybody together. But here at this breakfast, it was really done. I mean, Neil's speech was heartfelt and true, and the like. And you know what was interesting about all of that was, see, I think Neil made a point to run a certain kind of campaign. And if people that were advising him that might have thought differently of his strategy, Neil actually went out of his way not to do anything that somebody would consider nasty. And the same thing happened for David Ige. That's unusual.
You know, we're going to talk some more about the governor's race later on. Let me go through a couple more questions, a couple more points about the Schatz-Hanabusa, so that we kind of keep a train going, and I'm still hoping to get some good questions from our viewers. A lot of this goes back to the soap opera around the death of Senator Ige and the deathbed wish. I'd like to throw that out. Folks think that the deathbed wish played out as an issue I'm asking about the Schatz-Hanabusa thing now. They came out pretty much dead even. So do you think that the deathbed wish was something that was on the minds of voters or a segment of the voters?
I think that's been overplayed. So I'll go out and say that.
Yes.
So I think that it was an important symbol for some voters, you know, particularly older voters. But I think in some ways this hurt Abercrombie much more than it ever hurt Schatz. I mean, this was a symbol for his arrogance, for his lack of respect for senior people. And Schatz managed to, I mean, this is one of the extraordinary things about this campaign is that Schatz, who was appointed by Abercrombie, who had a lot of his political career tied with Abercrombie, managed to really distance himself from a governor who lost in, you know, the biggest margin in any primary election in American history. And Schatz is probably going to win. I mean, this is an extraordinary story.
No, they checked on it.
Yeah,
He actually-
Yes, more. Yeah, only two, and they were from political scandals. Murkowski in
Governor's
Alaska,
race.
2 governors, and Ma Ferguson in Texas back in the 20s. I mean, this is unprecedented.
It takes a professor to point these things out.
Yeah, exactly.
But one of the things I had to wonder is, I think Colleen Hanabusa has to at least be asking herself, maybe I should have run for governor after all, given what happened
I
with
could
the
have run for governor.
Well, and as we all know, part of her camp wanted to.
Yes, they did.
They said, we want you to run against Neil and punish him for his decision. It was her decision to run for Senate. She was the one that said, I don't want to be an administrator, I want to be a legislator. Colleen made that choice.
But she was torn. There was a lot of pressure for her to run for governor.
You know, one thing I'd be curious to ask the other folks here, which I've been very surprised about in this campaign, is the lack of negative advertisements. I mean, I sort of thought maybe Colleen would have gone negative or a little bit. I mean, there were no negative advertisements in this campaign. Was that surprising to you, or?
Was it a Schatz-Hanabusa race?
Yeah.
Well, there were, but it was all on the
Well,
radio.
I mean, but it's all very, very subtle. I mean, this is not the sort of black and white PRP
Some of the radio
style.
ads were not so subtle. There were some
Really?
radio spots I heard for Colleen Hanabusa saying, clean air, the guy's for clean air, and he's going to do this in the environment and so forth. But in fact, it's experience and it's leadership and so forth. And some of those were rather pointed. So you didn't do it on TV, but it was there at the radio level for sure, and definitely the social media level.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I agree. I thought there was definitely negative advertising. It was on radio. There was no question that at the end, the Schatz campaign made a negative radio buy, and it was fairly substantial. And it was a classic negative ad. It attacked the opponent, it attacked Colleen for being negative, and then it said what? Typical for someone who voted herself a 38% pay raise. And I thought,
Oh, I missed this.
Yeah.
I missed that one.
Which of course is really misleading.
Yeah, it was hard hitting. Although, given the state of campaigns these days, those things will not even be considered.
I mean, mainland style, this wouldn't even register.
But it was hard fought. That race was very hard fought. I think that one of if I was going to advise the governor as a person who just wanted him to win, I think that he probably would have been told that he should have been a lot negative early on. In fact, I think one of the weaknesses of his campaign was that he allowed the opposition to define the issues. I mean, it's ridiculous. You think about it. If the tax on pensions happened 4 years ago, it was one issue in a slew of issues. And all of a sudden, that becomes the issue in the entire campaign, not only in the governor's race, in almost every race. Everybody's running around saying, I didn't
agree,
vote.
Governor, but remember, he said, Neil Abercrombie, I am going to roll over the AARP and get that pension tax passed at some point.
That's exactly the point I'm trying to make. You got to congratulate, first of all, the AARP for making an issue that was so close to them that important. I have never seen seniors in any race define an issue that becomes a cutting-edge issue and whether or not somebody else gets elected. And, I mean, Neil did a lot more, in my opinion, more controversial things, and they didn't stick, but that stuck. So
I'm going to move us along, keep us on the Schatz-Hanabusa thing again for a minute, because we have plenty of time to talk about the governor's race, because that was pretty fun. I had an interesting hypothetical from Tom from it doesn't really say. It says, so what if by some act of God Colleen Hanabusa wins? Does the panel think Abercrombie and Schatz should go to court? But basically, would you rule out Schatz going to court if Hanabusa sneaks out a 10-vote margin?
Yeah, I don't think it's to his benefit, much less what his initial reaction.
And the way the law is set up is so difficult, right?
Well, actually, it would be easier for him to challenge the election probably than it would be for her. Just because it would probably be a lot closer.
yes.
That's what I'm saying.
And therefore, if something really was wrong, he would fit under the definition of challenge. But I don't think that that's something that I think what Schatz will be doing is looking to see, which race he's going to. I mean, there's going to be another senator's race in 2 years.
Yes. And it's that office has to run again. before Mazie does in 18.
And Tulsi Gabbard is looking at both of those years, 2016 and 2018.
We have a call. We had a call from someone in Volcano. Holding the election tomorrow is inappropriate. More than just the 2 districts were affected. Most are on catchment with no power. It's very stressful. I will be unable to vote, and I'm not happy that the election is happening too fast and not the entire district. And a second caller, what about the people in Puna that can't get out to vote or risk possible looting? The question that this raises for me is the decision-making of the Office of Elections. And do you folks think that this was the right call, either, after they decided to close the 2 precincts, before the election? Or was there a better way to handle this so we wouldn't end up in this place?
Originally, when we thought it was going to be absentee and it would be a couple weeks, no one was complaining about that. It was only when we came out with a different decision that said, no, we're all going to go to one place on Friday and get this over with, that the complaints started. This is probably a little romantic of me, but I look at the caucus in Iowa and I look at the New Hampshire primary where the candidates actually get out and spend time with people. And there's a part of me that says it would be kind of neat for Colleen and Brian to spend 2 weeks in Puna and let them get to know him. And then those kind people can tell us who our senator ought to be.
I think the folks that called in have very reasonable arguments. If I had been the elections office, and I know Scott Nago and Rex Cadilla, and those folks are trying the best they can. They're under a heck of a lot of pressure right now. I mean, the nation is looking on this race, even though it's not going to affect the balance of the Senate. But you had 21 days from the day of the primary. That's, I think, around August 30th. There was time, and even another week would probably have been a big difference in terms of just restoring power and getting the word out about the election. And I think that if Colleen does decide to go through, she does have a compelling argument there, which would, I guess it would go to the Supreme Court for their consideration.
Do you know whether there was any consultation with the campaigns?
No, I don't. And, well, the only thing about this discussion that I'd like to add is it reinforces my belief that the election should be run by the lieutenant governor. One of the biggest mistakes is that, because you would have somebody that's going to be elected as a result of the decision, forced to make this decision and explain it.
But wasn't it the Democrats in the legislature that changed that once a Republican got into office? Is that when that happened?
No, I think there were a lot of people who didn't want it. It was during I think Mazie was the
This is like a
lieutenant
test.
governor.
Yeah, it was.
I believe that the having elections run by somebody who the people directly hold accountable makes a difference. And whenever I know when my first election, when I was lieutenant governor, I was literally sweating, making sure that nothing went wrong. Because what else are you going to be judged on?
Right.
The election.
It's not like you got anything else to do. That's right.
Well, at least
exactly.
that's public.
Well,
And
good point.
interestingly enough, isn't the last person in Hawaii to be able to get a recount was in 2008?
Colleen
Hanabusa.
Although it didn't affect the
wasn't-
outcome of the
it
vote.
wasn't-
No,
Yeah,
but she was able to get a recount. And also, I believe, didn't after that she proposed legislation on changing ballot counting, which of course died in the Congress.
And we don't have an automatic recount as many other places do.
Okay, so any last words on the Schatz-Hanabusa race that we haven't gotten to?
It's a hell of a way to pick a senator.
It's called democracy. Right? It was fun. Okay, now again, let's talk a little bit about the Ige Abercrombie race. We were talking earlier about it's the biggest defeat in the history.
I didn't know that.
And what do you think of that? Having been along on the well, one of the biggest. You were on the other side
Yeah, I
of
was
probably
on the
the
other
other
side.
biggest one in 1986.
Yes. Well, actually, also in 1990, for my re-election, I think we still hold the record for the best, the greatest spread or the largest win over a re-election.
You were with the governor's campaign. I was curious.
Which say that loosely.
Okay.
I was and I am, but I wasn't in any of the real,
But yes, absolutely.
Okay.
No, absolutely not. But we had early polls that were red flags that indicated there was a problem, and a lot of people simply did not believe them. I mean, it went against history. Inside the campaign, how did they view those early polls?
Well, I think first of all, if they viewed them as they didn't trust them, and then but as time went on, you obviously knew that things were not going as well as you wanted it to, so they were trying to respond to them, and also you don't want to go around saying we are losing to the troops.
Yeah, the polls are
Yeah, so you got to do what you got to do. I'm sure that a lot of that happened. What I think they may have failed to take advantage of was more than just the horse race aspects of the polls. There were a lot of things in the polls that gave you indications that may have allowed you to change strategy, deal with other issues. Why is this happening? I mean, Ige was totally unknown entity, and all of a sudden he's credible. I mean, most of that sends a signal someplace. How do you deal with it?
What our pollster said, Merriman River Group, because we were the first to come out with a poll in June that said he was up by 10, David Ige, 11 points over the governor. We polled it in May and held off to go back in the field and do it again. What our pollster said was the governor has an option here, and one of the things he could do is he could define David Ige in a negative fashion. Yeah. And you indicated that earlier, he did not do that.
And that was a deliberate strategy. And frankly, that is, everything's done now. So the race is over. And that would be one of the good things about what happened in this election, because it allows us now to put together a much more formidable campaign for the governorship than if either party, because David also didn't go negative. I mean, there was a time when somebody was probably whispering in his ear, you better go negative if you're going to catch up.
I don't think he had to.
Yeah. Well, no, when he first started running, he was way behind. I mean, everybody expected him to lose. And that would be the time normally in a campaign when you would go negative.
Okay, for everybody, what do you think happened? What did voters, what clicked in voters' minds that so many of them would vote against Neil?
So political science says this should not happen. What just happened, that doesn't happen. So because there's been no political scandal. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that results from corruption scandals. Nothing like that happened. There's, of course, been no suggestion of that. And so at some point, I think it just was a combination of things. I mean, voters finally decided they had simply had enough. They found the governor obnoxious. He managed to frustrate some of his core constituencies, the elderly, progressives, environmentalists, the teachers' unions, people who might have supported him. And I think Ige's campaign, too, because the governor never defined him in a negative way, which he could have done, people were able to read what they wanted as their fantasy governor of Hawaii in David Ige, because nobody really knew who he was or what he stood for, but he seemed like a more approachable figure than Abercrombie. And so this, I think, process went through voters' minds, and I think the fact that Cayetano and Ariyoshi supported Ige early on, it gave sort of elite legitimacy to this candidate. And voters just began to move in that direction.
I agree with what Colin.
It's shocking. This doesn't happen.
I agree what you said exactly. I will add one other thing. Our first poll on Ige Abercrombie showed it was an anybody but Abercrombie. Most people didn't even know who David Ige was, but they were willing to try somebody else. By the time we went in the field a month and a half later, suddenly a lot of those voters were saying, hey, I like this guy. Mm-hmm. Like his positive numbers were nearly 60%. And you got to give credit to Ige. He did a heck of a grassroots job. He shook hands. He turned down not a single debate. He was there every single time, and he kept it very positive throughout.
His campaign started to resemble mine. I told him that. I said,
learning from the best.
Just like, in fact, when I walked in his campaign headquarters election night, a lot of the workers were people who had supported me. And they came running up and saying, hey, thank you for teaching us how to do this. It was kind of interesting because I just left Neil and it was not a happy time. But, of all of Neil's characteristics, and there might have been many, many things that upset people, I think the one thing that he learned a little too late is that you can't be, when you're what it takes to be governor is not the same thing as when you're in the Congress. Exactly. In the Congress, you introduce an issue, you become a cheerleader. Mm-hmm. When you're governor, you're speaking for all the people of the state, and oftentimes you make decisions that maybe even a majority of them don't like. So you ought not to be a cheerleader for that decision. And Neil has his way of being a cheerleader so he decides he's going to redevelop Kaka'ako, and the first thing he does is bring up a big old building. That's what the developer does. The developer does that. You know, you're not supposed to be out there cheerleading. What you should be doing is telling all the people who may not agree with your decision that you're sensitive to.
What I was thinking about today, I don't mean to interrupt you, John, but I was remembering your race, and I was also, though, remembering that Neil Abercrombie was elected at the time when Linda Lingle was at a very low level of popularity. Mufi Hanneman wasn't particularly popular, and he was coming from, you know, Washington, and sort of a blank slate also. So he may have come in with people looking for a candidate that's like David Ige.
That's exactly what I was going to say, in that I think Neil went out the same way he came in. When Neil
with a bang.
And when Neil won the governor, I would argue that a lot of that was I don't like Mufi, and when Neil lost, it was I don't like Neil. So it was the people of Hawaii not only voting for somebody, but voting against somebody. They elected Neil because they were voting against Mufi, and they elected David when they were voting against Neil.
I also think there was probably something about this moment in time. I think that voters across this country, and the same in Hawaii, are at a point in their political timing where they just kind of don't like incumbents to start. I mean, it's just a lot of things piling up, so you have a perfect storm. You know, all you need to do is sort of aggravate it, and
with just 41% of the registered voters as well.
what are you going to do?
Low turnout once again.
Well, and as both the Merriman poll and the Ward poll of Coast identify the single biggest issue as we don't like Neil. Having said that, he had a 10-to-1 advantage on funding. It was absolutely huge by modern standards. And when the dust settles, and I understand the bit about Neil's personality, I think we need to drill down and look at the race his campaign ran. You had so much money, and this is your result. Part of it is how the race was run.
Well, I was just nodding at Governor John because that was a Heftel thing too, and the more Heftel spent on money, the less people liked him. So sometimes your personality just doesn't work. We're gonna take a break now, and we're gonna then move on to other things. So right now, to our viewers, tonight we're talking to political experts about what to expect in November's general election. We invite you to join our conversation by calling, emailing, or tweeting your questions and comments. Call 973-1000 on Oahu and 1-800-283-2847 from the neighbor islands. What about crossover? I mean, we always talk about crossover, the primary. Hardly anybody voted in the Republican primary. What were those Republican voters doing?
I don't see anybody who was going to vote for either Duke Iona or Mufi Hanneman crossing over to vote for Neil Abercrombie or David Ige. I know they talk about it all the time. I just don't see that happening.
So do you think they just stayed out of the election? I mean, there were very few people voting for Republicans in the primary election.
I think Mufi Hanneman got something like 2,000 votes. I mean, it was really, really, really low. And we'll see whether it really is a three-way race in the general right now. But I don't know that that's the case. The primary, and I'm sure the governor would agree, it's the core Democrats that turn out.
Yeah, and a lot of there are a lot of Democrats who, you know, really look like Republicans that also vote in our, primary. And then they vote for Republicans later on. But they're not crossing over. I don't think the strategy.
This crossover
really
stuff is a real myth. I mean, the studies that have been done, the research shows that this kind of strategic voting where I'm a Republican, but I'm going to get in the Democratic primary and mess things up, you know, there's a tiny, tiny number of very politically involved people who do something like that. I mean, most voters, they're not interested in playing games. They want to support the candidates they like.
And a lot of voters, if true Republican voters, don't have very many people to support in the primary, so they don't even show up to vote.
Yeah, why bother? It's not a deep bench. We'll wait until the general election.
And that's why the general election always has a lot more voters than the primaries do.
And then now on the lieutenant governor's race, that was pretty interesting too. What do you guys think happened?
Republican or Democrat?
Democrat.
one was,
we'll start with Democrat.
I'll tell you, Clayton He and Schatz-Hanabusa, very different campaigns. Schatz-Hanabusa was running he had great commercials. Positive, can you pronounce his name correctly? His wonderful family and so forth. Daddy! Yeah,
Fantastic stuff. That, right?
Yeah, Clayton He was issue-oriented. It focused on, I got the minimum wage passed. He led same-sex marriage, unemployment insurance and so forth. And near the end, he was critical. I wouldn't quite call it a negative ad, but he it certainly got to
Hawaii negative.
Raising doubling the cost of the lieutenant governor's office, moving to Maui. And
Why won't you debate me?
Why won't you debate me? And you know what? It didn't work.
Well, then Satsui, though, came back negative at the very end with a very strong ad that basically had, mean-looking pictures of Clayton He.
That's not hard to come by.
I did not say that.
He could be an opposing man.
Clayton probably just, had a lot of negatives. People who just, didn't like him, as well as people who like him. I mean, Clayton's not a person you don't feel strong about.
Yeah.
And frankly, I was hoping he would stay in the legislature. Because he is
the voters led him,
in my opinion, he's a good legislator.
He is very effective.
Hawaii's going to miss him. I mean, frankly, his non-presence is going to be felt. And if he was lieutenant governor, I don't know what he would be doing up there. He would have been terribly disappointed with the position.
Well, now we've got. Oh, go ahead.
With all respect to the Satsui advertisements, I think just as people voted against Neil, they voted against Clayton.
It does bring up sort of this case of strange bedfellows, though, is that now, for the first time in many, many years, we have a ticket that's made up of people with the same ethnicity.
Two Japanese Americans, yeah.
What do you folks think of that? It's very interesting. Historically, it's very interesting. We know, Governor, that generally there's an effort to balance a ticket.
At least that's what you try to sell, and you try to balance it. I think it's. Well, there are going to be a lot of people who bring that issue up, even if, maybe not openly, but people will talk about it.
I mean, remember, Neil Abercrombie and Brian Schatz ran 4 years ago, two white guys on the ticket.
No, one Jewish guy. I keep reminding people, Schatz, Jewish guy,
But the last time we had two AJAs on the ticket, it was Mazie Hirono and I think Matt Matsunaga, wasn't it? And then
they tried.
They tried. Lost to Linda Lingle and Duke Iona.
Governor Ariyoshi and Nelson Doy.
Right, that was what we were talking about a long time ago.
Yeah, long time ago. But I think it's going to be a very interesting race. But ultimately, I don't think it's going to matter. And
you're actually saying now you think that this is going to be a Democratic romp?
Yeah, I do. I'm going to predict that tonight.
Okay,
so on your show, I'm going to predict that this is going to be a Democratic romp. We're going to win.
This is an advisor to Democratic and a former Democratic governor speaking now, folks.
Yeah, the guy who just backed up the guy who lost by 2-1 was predicting a victory. No, the good thing about it, though, which I've often thought about, I mean, seriously, is that, we in Hawaii brag about the fact that you've had a Japanese governor, a Hawaiian governor, a Filipino governor, and there are people who are starting to suspect that there would be no others after this particular lineup. And what this goes to show is that we may be mature enough to have another Japanese governor. And that's good because that tells me there's going to be another Hawaiian out there someplace.
Okay,
so I don't want to be.
What's your folks' handicap at this point? I mean, David Ige clearly picked up a lot of momentum off of this race.
He sure did. I mean, there are the polls that show Duke Iona up over an Ige matchup. I'm not so sure I believe that. Once the ads start, once his name is connected again with the Lingle administration, I think his numbers are going to go down. I do think it's going to be a challenge. I mean, Ige, he got to run as the not Neil candidate. Now he has to run as the governor of Hawaii, and he has some liabilities that he has to overcome. I mean, he himself admits that he is not a good public speaker. I would agree with that assessment. He needs to come across, I think, a little more commanding, and his low-key style, I think, does work to some extent. But going up against Duke Iona and having people now think, okay, this guy really is going to be the governor, I think he does need some help with some of these communication skills. skills.
Duke
Yeah.
Iona, Mufi
Exactly.
Hanneman, very
Yeah, we have these larger-than-life
commanding
characters.
figure,
Yeah.
and then David Ige sharing a three-way debate. That's, but you know what? I don't think Ige can change. I think. Did you see the Andy Bumatai video?
Yeah.
He's like, they brought in a coach and tried to get me to. They just said, forget it. We can't change this guy. I think that's very appealing to a lot of people after 4 years of Neil Abercrombie.
Yeah, I was going to mention, I think that Ige has developed a persona, and this will help him. You know, so I mean, he's went out and told everyone, you know, I'm the quiet guy. I just get things done. I'm not a great speaker. And as Chad said, that everyman persona appeals to, you know, the American and the Hawaiian psyche. We are distrustful of the person who's a little too slick and a little too smooth, and he certainly isn't that.
Yeah,
Well, neither is Duke Iona in particular. I mean, Duke is a distinguished figure, and you know he's going to stand up. His campaign theme is in the last word of the campaign. I think it's trust, balance. I mean, it's.
Oh yeah, it's something crazy.
But it's. Okay,
I'm sorry. I am supposed to be objective.
no, you're not expected to be objective, but I'm trying to be here, and I just want to say that I think that we also need to consider the fact that here the Democrats have had another all-out battle on several fronts now. We got one caller I wanted to pull in here. He says Governor Abercrombie didn't get reelected because people are tired of the good old boy network. Him, Dickie Wong, Clayton He, all part of it. I just
John
maybe
Waihee.
John Waihee. I'm glad you said that. And then and here's another one. This is
Don't forget that.
hear me roar. Here comes a Republican saying our whole family is Republican and we all voted for Abercrombie. We did cross over because they wanted to sabotage. I don't know why.
Well, it worked.
Usually
you got David Ige.
I had heard from a high-level Republican strategist that actually where Republicans were planning to cross over, they were going to vote for Abercrombie because they thought that he would be weaker against Iona.
Republicans are so few in number in this state, and I congratulations, you were among the few that did. But
The Republicans' problem is going to be not so much David Ige as disengaging themselves from their national platform.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It's really what they stand for that doesn't fit with the people of Hawaii. And until they have somebody who can not look like they're running with Sarah Palin and the
Ted
Tea
Cruz.
Party and Ted Cruz, they're going to have a hard time winning an election against any force.
Well, I think that
I
we're
would say
going to
that-
set up. We're going to set up a show where we have all Republicans. I
Yeah.
promise, boss. Boss. No, I think that I'm a little concerned about this leaning so heavily Democrat. You guys aren't
I actually
partisan,
think Duke
obviously.
Iona
but-
should not be underestimated at all. I think he learned a lot. He was actually shocked that he lost to Abercrombie 4 years ago. Remember, Linda Lingle lost her first time around against Ben Cayetano. Mind you, it was a much smaller margin. But I think Iona has gotten better. He's learned how to be a better candidate. He certainly has a money advantage right now over David Ige. And I think, I don't know that it's as connected to the national party as it may appear. This is still local politics.
Are there factors, gentlemen, that in the economy or in the attitude of voters? Earlier Governor mentioned the anti-incumbent sentiment in Hawaii. The Democratic Party is the incumbent party. Do you see features that might influence people to vote Republican this year?
I think it's less likely to happen because Ige won. I think had Abercrombie won, I do see this narrative. You do see this happen, of course. I mean, it happened here. I mean, it's happened in Massachusetts and other places, deep blue states where people are so fed up of the Democratic establishment, where they see that it somehow is corrupt, even if that's not the case. They'll switch over and vote for a Republican. I mean, it's easier for gubernatorial candidates to distance themselves from the national party than it is for congressional candidates. I mean, Charles Djou is going to have a really hard time distancing himself from the Tea Party reputation.
Actually,
but I think
we
Duke
need to-
can.
Go ahead.
At the same time, I would argue if the Republicans are looking for a win, that the CD1 race is their best shot.
Agreed.
Charles Djou last time came within 8 points of Colleen Hanabusa, who I would argue is a stronger candidate than Mark Takai. This happened when a Hawaiian presidential candidate, Barack Obama, was on the ballot, And I don't think Charles is afraid of Mark at all. And I think that's the best Republican chance in this state.
I think it's going to be a real question whether Republicans support Duke as much as the National Party supported Lyndon. Because of that reason, they may just decide to focus.
Well,
I think Duke's a great candidate, by the way. Don't get me wrong. I appointed him judge. You know, I gave him his public career, so I got to believe a little bit in his talent.
The Republican Governors Association has already come out strongly in support. The election night or the day after, they said we're going to back Duke Aiona. Whether that'll turn into money coming our way, we'll see.
That's what I think. That's going to be a real question, is whether or not he can sell the national. And in fact, I remember sitting down with some very key supporters of Djou, of Charles, and them telling me that the only reason why they were taking certain positions was because they needed the funding that these positions were providing. Yeah. So this is not the problem with the Republican Party is that they're becoming very litmus test oriented. And if you want resources, you've got to say certain things.
And we saw that in a lot of their primary candidates, I thought. Yeah. But I think a huge Republican problem is going to be money. The Republican mainland money is going to stay on the mainland and go to those Senate races.
Yes.
They want the Senate. And therefore, how much money can Charles Djou get for a House race? How much can Duke get for?
Yeah.
So they're going to have trouble getting money. Democrats, it's Big D, it's Hawaii. They will have money.
I know how to put you on the spot, Governor. Okay, so advise the Republicans how they can beat the Democrats.
Well, I tell you what. I tell you what they should do. If I was a Republican in Hawaii, I would resurrect Hiram Fong. I would bring back one of Hawaii's greatest senators. I would make him my hero, and I would patent my policies and the way I approach issues around Hiram Fong. They thought of him doing that with Pat Psyche by bringing her. These are people that got elected in Hawaii by huge margins. In fact, Hiram Fong is one of the most unsung heroes from Hawaii. He's probably single-handedly changed the face of America more than any other senator that served in the United States Senate by his changes to the immigration law for Asians. What if I was a young Republican? That's what I'd be talking about. Instead of chasing around, trying to sort of act like Ted Cruz.
I agree with you, but I will point out Pat Psyche lost races for the U.S. Senate and for the governorship.
No, but she ran for the Congress, and she got elected. And she was very effective while she was elected. You know, when we stopped the bombing of Kaho'olawe, Kakaka introduced a resolution in the Congress, but the person who went to actually talk to President Bush and got him to issue that order was Pat Psyche. So what you have here is you have a Republican standing up for Native Hawaiians on an issue that today their right-wing groups would have probably opposed.
That's another good reason to elect Charles Djou, right?
No, what's good, not until, no. You see, the problem is Charles hasn't gotten that kind of commitment. He talks, walks, and acts like he has teacups. What he ought to be doing is acting, talking, and being like he was Pat Psyche or Hiram Fong.
Well, Pat Psyche is the party chair. Very happy to have Charles as the candidate.
Well, she knows I'm telling the truth. She knows. She and I both know each other for 25 years. She is no Sarah Palin. I know Pat Psyche.
Although the image of Charles trying to walk and talk as Pat Psyche's somewhat off to
Well, it's a little.
and with teacups.
Well, he runs with teacups right now, you know.
But his campaign makes a very compelling claim that Republicans are going to be in charge of the House for the foreseeable future, maybe the Senate. We need a voice for Hawaii. I mean, that is a really smart way of positioning themselves.
And they ought to then make their message a voice for Hawaii. I'm serious. I've told this to a number of those, But what's also interesting when you talk about the Djou and Mark and Tulsi is the rise of the veterans.
Oh yes, that's
in
a great
this election,
and that will help Takai considerably, I think, against Djou. Look at Tulsi Gabbard 2 years ago.
Was that a wash? They're both veterans.
No, Votes for Vet has come out for Takai.
and spent a lot of money, just like they did on Gabbard. And they're not gonna go for Djou. They're gonna stick with Mark Takai.
It'll be interesting to see how the veterans vote goes. You know, from where they may have felt like the Republicans didn't support the VA enough.
So different than back when I was running, you know, when nobody really put the fact that you had served in Vietnam in the military, you know, you didn't bring it up. Today, they are heroes.
It's a badge of honor.
And you wear it. And they've become, I think they had an impact in this election. They really made it possible, probably for Mark to win.
Yes.
So we've done a little bit of this, and I have to admit I thought about this question all day. So you're saying that Charles is not a Djou-in?
Oh boy! You get the award
Sorry.
for the evening.
I was waiting for Chad to do the Ed McMahon laugh.
No, but anyway, sorry, I couldn't
We'll be
resist.
here all week.
Well, let's talk a little bit though about Mark Takai. He actually came from very far behind. Again, very low recognition. What do you make of that campaign?
Well, remember, it wasn't that far behind. He and Donna Kim were clearly the two people that were ahead of the pack. None of those other guys, I think, in the end, got above 10%. Even Stanley Chang. And he managed to turn that thing around. I think he got on the ground early and often, had good endorsements, like people like Tammy Duckworth, for example. And I think Kim was slow to getting out of the gate. And once that vote vet stuff, I mean, when you got ads linking Mark Takai with the 442, I mean, that really resonates with a lot of people. Having said all that, Djou is a formidable candidate. He's a very good debater. He knows his issues, and he's not going to fold.
Do you think that? Go ahead, John.
But I also think Donna didn't do particularly well in the debates.
No, she didn't.
Yeah, and so once at the end, my concern in terms of what happened is that the anyone but Donna contingent took. They came together very late.
I think
they wanted to.
Versus non-progressive
there's
Democrat?
no question they wanted to look at Chang. Chang was raising money, he was progressive. They wanted to support him, but he was trailing in the polls. They made a relatively late decision to try to get together and back Takai under the auspices of Votes for Vet. That was torpedoed when Emily's list came out and endorsed Donna, and so Votes for Vet was on their own. But it turned out, in this case, their 100,000 was enough.
Let me ask, what do you think was happening in voters' minds?
I think the CD1 race was not the priority. The governor's race and the Senate race and even the LG's race became interesting. You never really had a very good debate. Very difficult to have 7 candidates, including at this table with Mahealani Richardson. There weren't very many advertisements as well, and the focus wasn't there. Really, the race is now Charles Djou against Mark Takai.
I think also, you know, what was David Ige's rise probably helped Mark Takai.
How?
I mean, to the extent that there was any kind of ethnic voting going on, he probably benefited. And so you got to give some credit to that.
I did talk to one person who was very involved with these campaigns, and I asked, this is very early, I mean, maybe April, March, April, and I said, well, what do you think Mark has going for him more than anything else? And she said, his surname. The only Japanese American in the race.
Yeah, and I think that, and the Filipino voters. But you know what's interesting to me was that Donna started out very strong, but she ended in the same place she began.
She did.
So which was essentially her district. I think I agree. You know, she just started a little late. I knew Mark when he was student body president.
Yeah, me too.
So did I.
So did you.
Yeah.
And you know what he's like. I mean, he's
Oh.
like, you know. So one thing you got to give Mark himself some
You do.
credit. I mean, that guy will, you know.
He's been working away toward this
For a long time.
long time, right?
And unlike most of those guys in that race, except Chang, he gave up his seat to run for that.
Yeah.
Okay, I got a good question from a voter who said, with this whole storm thing, that's what they were thinking voter turnout was suppressed by. But do you think, what impact did you think low turnout had? And anything that jumps in your mind about what we could do about low voter turnout? I was thinking about initiative, referendum, and recall. The whole issue.
It's going to haunt me for the rest of the
No, but that's an old joke between us. But the fact of the matter is, you know, do we need to do something to shake things up in Hawaii politics and get people out?
I think we need none of the above link on the ballot. That's, you know, so if you don't
I'm
like
glad
any
you
of
said
them,
that. Yeah.
I think instant voter runoff, is that the right
Yeah.
acronym, where the top 2 people, regardless of of party, you get probably the two, if you will, middle moderate ground candidates. California
style.
is using it. I think that is something that might be appealing.
I think it might help voter turnout. I mean, you know, the one thing that actually does increase voter turnout, so I agree that the storm probably had a small effect. I mean, it is a little lower than I would have expected, but, you know, people, all of these things, when you, even same-day registration, that stuff does help. But, you know, people vote because they feel a social obligation to vote. At the end of the day, that is why people vote. I mean, sure, there are exciting elections and things like that, but that's what we need. I mean, we need to increase the social pressure for people to vote. And I think one way to do this, and Neil Milner has suggested this in his columns, is we need a big nonprofit organization to get some energy behind voter turnout. And one way, I mean, this will probably, you know, anger viewers, but one way that's been shown to really increase voter turnout and be effective is just to mail out cards that show whether or not you voted and whether or not your neighbors voted.
Like a shaming?
You shame people into vote. That's the one way that is proven to show to increase voter turnout. Now, I doubt that's going to happen, but it's very hard to do.
I think it's also a problem is we always have been a one-party state.
Agreed.
Mm-hmm. We were a red state as a territory, we're a blue state as a state, and even if you're a Democrat, it's not good to have a non-competitive situation. And I think a lot of people sit out because they say, what difference does it make? I know who's going to win, it's just a matter of what shade of blue.
You know, I sort of agree with that, but I think that one of the bigger contributor, the reinforcer of being a one-party state was when we went to single-member districts.
You know, we're going to talk on the internet a little bit. I have to wrap us up now. It's been a fast hour. Yeah. Next time on Insights, our election 2014 coverage will continue, bringing you candidates from 2 Honolulu City Council races to talk about key issues in their districts and why they believe they offer the best representation for their constituents. Joining host Mahealani Richardson will be former State Representative Tommy Waters and attorney Trevor Ozawa from Council District 4, along with incumbent City Councilwoman Carol Fukunaga and former State Representative Sam Iona from Council District 6. That's next time on Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Daryl Huff. Ahui ho.